We are live. Welcome to the Communication 24/7 podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Furlong. And for today, we're doing another episode of Unscripted. So I have a very special guest, Monique Russell, and she is an author. She is a speaker. She is a consultant, a coach. She is a global communication expert. So someone after my own heart. So I'm super excited to have you on the show to talk about communication. I think we're going to focus on telling your stories and how we can go about doing that and becoming more comfortable and confident, in that arena as well. So, Monique, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm excited to have you.
Me too, Jen. It is not often that I get a fellow communication professional to be chatting it up. So this is a special treat for me starting off the week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same for me. I love talking with other communication professionals because I always say, look, communication is a skill just like any other skill, right? We got to work at it to get good at it. And we need to continue to work on this craft and develop our knowledge. So, I mean, for me, in a selfish way, this is kind of helpful for me to have this talk with you as well, because, I know I'm going to learn something. I mean, everybody's going to learn something, through this conversation, and I'm no exception to that. So I guess let's just kind of dive right on in. And I gave a very brief intro as to, what you're known for as a communication expert. But why don't you, before we get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into this field, and, what do you love about being a communication coach and consultant? Where did that start?
So let me tell you, I grew up in the beautiful islands of the Bahamas. And a lot of what I do today is birthed out of my personal experiences. So, communications, coaching, consulting, helping people to become better at connecting with others is something that I have experienced since I was a young girl because I knew what it was like to not fit in. I knew what it was
Mm.
like to be or feel outside. And I experienced that as I was growing up. And I experienced that even in my young adult life. And so, if you had asked me years ago how I got into this work, I would not have had the awareness to tell you what I'm telling you right now.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
I do know now that what I'm doing is birthed out of that desire. And I think when we begin to help others and connect to our purpose and share our stories, this is what it's all about, understanding how our life experiences and the things that we've gone through can help others to connect in a deeper and a more profound way. So I live here in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Like I said, I grew up in the beautiful islands of the Bahamas, went to school in the cold Minnesota. And
Whoa.
yeah,
Big
I
difference,
just
right?
a huge difference, but I loved it because I was ready to go, Jen. I wanted to
Mhm.
get off of the island. I wanted to explore new things. I was 17 years old when my mom waved goodbye at the airport and wished me the best of luck. And I went there and I got into the Minneapolis airport and I got on the campus shuttle. And, some people were there with their parents and others were going back to school, seniors and things like that. And I was there for the first time. I wasn't as prepared for the winter, for the
Mhm.
cold,
I
but
bet.
yeah, I wasn't. But I got up there and it was like freedom. I
Mm.
just got right in. I started working on campus as a multicultural student consultant. I was very eager, very interested in connecting and doing things. And so I wish I could tell you that after all my studies, I got the dream job. I wanted to be a traveling international journalist. I was covering all the stories, but it didn't happen like that. So
Mhm.
I ended up starting working in a corporate environment. Well, I had my son, and then I started working in a corporate environment and just supporting leaders, helping leaders, and then watching behind the scenes what made them tick, what made them not tick, what made them stand
Mhm.
out, what made them not stand out. And because I was so bubbly, people would always ask me for advice, and I
Ah,
willingly gave it. So
yeah. Yeah.
that's part of why I'm doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah. That is wonderful. I think, one of the things that challenges a lot of people is when they do go into a new area, right? They get into a new environment. How did you, I know you have this bubbly personality and, it doesn't seem like you're shy by any stretch of the imagination. So, for those who find themselves in those types of situations where, they're not quite feeling comfortable, they don't quite feel like they're fitting in right in the moment. And this happens to us as adults all the time, right? Even going to a networking event, I get asked this question all the time, so how do you figure out a way to do just what you did, just kind of coming out of your shell? For someone like myself, who I'm naturally an introvert, it can be very challenging, at times when I'm placed in an environment where I don't feel quite like I'm myself, and comfortable in that environment. So how do you become that type of person where when you walk into the room, others will kind of take notice and say, "Hey, you know what? I'd like to get to know you a little better. Let me have your advice. You seem like you have it all together, you and your bubbly personalities. So, what can I do? What can I do to
First
be
of
more
all,
like
let me
you?"
pause and pump the brakes right there, okay? Because I can't tell you how many people say that. You got it all together. I'm like, no, I don't. Okay. So, but they don't
Right.
believe me. So I'm human just like everybody else.
Mhm.
But let me just get to your question. So how
Mhm.
do you prepare yourself? That's really it.
Right.
How do you prepare yourself
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
move into a space where you don't know someone or it's a new environment? For me,
Yeah.
yes, it was different because I had prepped myself mentally and I was excited and I love to explore new places. I don't have a problem connecting with people anywhere.
Mhm.
And so for me, that's just who I am.
Right.
But I will actually go on a limb to say you don't have a problem connecting with people anywhere either, Jen.
Mhm.
It's really just finding what's familiar. And it's so funny because
Yes.
I talked to someone about this just yesterday.
Mhm.
One of our family friends has a child that is starting a university and just was feeling out of place and not
Mhm.
knowing anybody, away from home for the first time. And it also made me think back to an episode that I did on my podcast recently
Mhm.
with Michael Fosberg, who he had traveled, I think it was to Portugal. And he felt so connected and he felt so embraced and accepted because he found something that was familiar. The Alabama
Mm.
choir happened
Mhm.
to be there at the time. He went to that place, he experienced it, he felt connected in a far away land. So when
Mm.
you are preparing to go into a new space, a new environment that where you don't know anyone, I would say first of all, prepare. Prepare as much as you can by finding out about the event, finding out about the people, put into your mind that your goal is not to connect with everybody in the room. What I do is I have an
Mhm.
intention to connect with one person, just one person to have a meaningful conversation and walk out of that. And I just pay attention to the energy of whoever I encounter. If I'm encountering someone who maybe we're not hitting it off and we don't have anything in common or familiar to go off of, then I just, thank them for their time and move to that other person. If you are hoping, I mean, you have to make an effort too. But if you are in an event that's in person, I always say hang around the snack table, right? You could always make
There you
small
go.
talk by the snack table. Go ahead and get yourself something to eat or something to drink. A lot of times, my clients who are introverts, they would wait until the actual program starts. So they will show up after the program starts or right when it starts instead of doing the pre-networking.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
pre-networking.
I could see that.
Sometimes, not all the time, obviously,
Right,
but
right.
I would say just prepare, put in your mind that, your goal is to connect with one person. Think about the things that you like and you enjoy. So you're not trying to be someone that you're not. You're
Yes,
just really
yes.
going into the space where if someone that you connect with enjoys traveling, if they enjoy reading, you might have a conversation around something that's common. So
Right,
get out of those what do you do opening lines because that's where it
right.
feels so weird and awkward and oh I'm this that so like throw those throw those lines out the window and start with something that's more engaging.
That is such great advice. I really love the focus on, think about what your goal is, and that one goal could be, let's just try to make a connection with one person and have a meaningful conversation. And I appreciate that you made that comment about, getting past the whole "what do you do," kind of line. And I think for many people like myself who can be very uncomfortable in those types of networking situations. I think one of the reasons we get uncomfortable is because you almost feel like you're on stage at that moment and you're not prepared, right? You don't know what it is that is expected, or what is your plan, to talk about. And then when you try to have a conversation with someone, it drives me nuts when it's at that superficial type of level. I very much enjoy having conversations like this where, I get to know a little bit more about you and kind of do that deep dive into what makes you tick and what can I learn, and, make that authentic, person to person connection. So I think anyone who's listening who also struggles, with those types of situations, absolutely, that's such great advice to just think about that connection, go beyond that first question, and if it's not working, it's okay. Like you
Mhm.
said, thank them and then move on,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
try to
yeah,
make a
yeah.
connection with somebody else.
And then choose the places, this is really important. Choose the
Mhm.
places that work for you.
Yeah.
Networking is just about connecting with new people, building
Yeah.
relationships. And it doesn't have to be in a big networking event. In fact,
Right.
those events that are designed like that, I don't go to them. I used to,
Mhm.
but I don't go to them because
Mhm.
they didn't feel connected for me.
Right.
So I prefer to network with people who are going to particular conferences that I'm attending,
Mm.
or
Mhm.
perhaps in my Zumba class, or, whatever
Right.
have you, because we are already sharing something in common. So it's much
Yes.
easier to have a conversation if we're there at a place and we're listening to a speaker, or we're trying to get information to grow our businesses. It's very easy to start from a place of familiar interests, or mutual interests, when we're already in that environment that sets it up like that.
Oh, and I love it that you're telling us that it's okay. You don't feel like there's something wrong with you, right? If
Nothing
you're
wrong.
forcing yourself to go to these types of, different workshops and networking events, because you're right, go to a Zumba class if that's what you're enjoying, or, whatever type of different types of workshops, because we're constantly networking. Now, Larry has joined us from from Facebook, and he is asking us a question. He says, I often find myself speaking with several people at once. I like to thoroughly answer questions, but it leaves me missing pre planned points I wanted to hit. Is there a trick to giving a great answer without cutting an interested listener short on their answer? I think that's a good question. I think a lot of people, when you go to these functions, probably experience something similar, where it just kind of like I have an idea of what I want to talk about, and somebody else is talking, and what do we do about that? Is there that a trick? How do you navigate those waters?
Yeah. So several years ago, I went to a Chamber of Commerce event that was put on by the Chamber of Commerce. It wasn't the
Mhm.
actual Chamber of Commerce event, but it was an event that they were in partnership with. And it was a great event. It had a lot of prestigious people there. And I went to that event and I'm like, oh my God, this is like a kid in a candy store. I'm going to hit up everybody. And so I started to have a conversation with one of the ladies, and she was over one of the organizations, and we had the conversation, and I felt like, she was kind of taking too long, and I was like, okay, well, that's great. I need to actually go meet some other people. And I went and I went and I went and I went and I did
Mhm.
that. Yes, you heard me right. Clear communication coach Monique Russell did that. And it was a disaster. I was
Oh.
not thinking about my audience. at that time. I was thinking about me, how many people I could hit, how many people I could get,
Mm-hmm.
how many people I could push my business card into their hand. And in that moment, I ended up walking out with a lot of business cards, but no meaningful connection, no deep connection. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about it like that, when you think, okay, if you have an interested listener, thank you for that question, Larry. If you have an interested listener and they're really interested and curious and genuine in what you are saying, you want to give the benefit of the doubt and you want to give them your undivided attention and really focus on giving them that answer that they are truly wanting to hear, because attention is a currency. When people give
Mm-hmm.
us our attention, like you're giving me your attention, you're giving Jen your attention, we're grateful that you're listening because you could be doing
Yes.
anything else, right?
Yep.
So we don't want to take it for granted that, okay, they're listening to me. I don't care how big you are, how small you are, whatever, how many followers you have. When someone gives you the gift of attention, especially
Mm-hmm.
right now in today's day and age, you want to be as grateful as possible. So when
Yes.
I did that back then, I was not thinking about my audience. It happens sometimes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to always center your audience no matter what. If it's a presentation, if it's a networking experience, hey, don't try to speak to several people all at the same time. Focus on
Right.
that one person and then move on to the next.
That is such great advice to be able to go in there. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying beforehand, having that plan when you're going to some of these events, have that plan to make, try to make a connection with, just one person and maybe, just one person at a time. If, you do want to meet several people, but I'll give yourself and them the gift of your time, and attention to be able to create that more meaningful, type of connection. I think
Mhm.
because we feel rushed a lot of times in these different types of events that we feel like, oh, I have limited amount of time, right? So I need to be able to make contact with as many people as possible, and really losing sight of the fact that it's the meaningful connections really that's going to make that difference. Larry, thank you for your question. Keep those questions coming because
Mhm.
this definitely helps. Nia is just adding in her comment. Yes, your attention is a currency. She loves that
Thanks,
comment.
Mia.
um so Larry says thank you. He said awesome
You're
advice.
welcome.
So this kind of brings us to one of the things that we had wanted to talk about today is, our stories. And, this is very much connected to networking, with others. So it's not just about, let me talk about me, right? And my experiences. But like you said, at the end of the day, considering who your audience is and what is it that they can take away, right, from our stories. So how does one go about, um first of all, figuring out what stories of ours are worthy of being told? I get asked this question a lot. I don't have any stories to tell. We all have stories to tell. So how do you coach someone into finding their stories that they
Okay,
can
so
tell?
I'm already bubbling with excitement, and I'm like, Jen, all of our stories are worthy of being
Hmm.
told. All
Yes.
of them.
Yes.
We have so many multi-layered aspects of our lives. So all of the stories that we have are worthy of being shared. The key is finding out which audience is connected to which
Mm.
story,
Mhm.
right? So I might have an experience in my life when I was growing up and I was a teenager and I wanted to step into my independence, etc. And I would be foolish to think that I am going to share that story with an audience that nobody has kids. Like nobody
Mhm.
has kids and
Mm.
they don't want kids and
Right.
they don't care about that stuff, right? So I have to think about my audience, but maybe sharing that story with my own teenager, that might be
Mhm.
the appropriate audience. So
Mhm.
the first thing to understand is that you have stories. I see this a lot in my practice. Sometimes people feel like they don't have anything valuable to share. That's not even about
Yes.
storytelling. That's about
Mhm.
confidence building. That's the emotional
Right.
intelligence piece. So
Mhm,
that's
mhm,
the methodology that I use, helping you to get more in touch with what your stories are, what
mhm.
part of your stories are relevant for which audiences, and how to own that. Because if you are in a story or an experience and you want to share it, I see some people sometimes say, I'm going to share this because I got to get over it. I got to get over it. I'm moving on. This is going to help me feel more confident. I say, no, don't do that, because you want to share your story from a place of victory, not a
Yes.
place of where you're currently going through that
Right.
process, because you open yourself up to more criticism, more judgment, which it's always going to happen. That's something you
Mhm.
just have to be prepared for. So you want to go through that experience and then use that story to empower your audience. If you're
Mhm.
thinking about, again, that the previous example that I just shared, it's centered on you.
Mhm.
I'm going to share this story so I can get over this. It's all about you. It's all
Yes.
about
Mhm.
you. It's all about what you're focused on. Again, you're not focusing on what they need to hear or what they want to hear, and how that part of your story can help them. So that is the key. The key is determining which part of your story is relevant for which audience.
This is why I love talking to a fellow communication person. How many times throughout the day, it doesn't matter if you're doing a workshop, if you're talking to somebody one on one, you always keep emphasizing it's about the audience. You got to put yourself in the back seat and really think about what is the audience going to get from this. So even though this is my story, right, and I'm sharing something of myself, still having to keep, just thinking about if it's one person or 1,000 people, what is the lesson learned, or what is it that is going to motivate them, what is it that they're going to take away, from this story, from this
Mhm,
talk. It's so important. It's really difficult though, to get some people to understand that piece of communication, not even just in storytelling, just in communication in general, make it about the other person. It can be really challenging, for, to have those types of conversations with someone, about that piece,
mhm.
you know.
It is, because
Um,
that goes into self-awareness.
Right.
Mhm,
Yeah, yeah. So how do you get, when you're working with people to, not necessarily become confident with sharing their stories at this point, but how do you help people discover their stories? Because, I think a big challenge that many will have is like, well, I've never really experienced something drastic in my life. I've never experienced, I'm not a cancer survivor. I'm not, they'll list all of these, dramatic experiences that they've seen others, they'll watch all these TED Talks, right? And it's like these huge things that, life-changing things that, usually people will share on things like TED Talk. But you said everybody does have stories. So how do we tap into those stories? What are some things that we can do to help us brainstorm about our experiences, and how to look at those experiences in a way that they are worthy of sharing?
mhm. So, I love it. I was smiling because I said, "Yeah, I those are things that I hear people say too, like,
Yep.
no, I
Yep.
don't have any life-changing, I'm not an
Right.
amputee," and, all this stuff.
Right.
I'm like, you don't have to be an amputee in order to get up and share your story.
Right.
So that, again, the piece, and I think this is very important that I don't want people to miss,
Mm,
because when we talk about public speaking and storytelling, there are
mhm.
technical aspects, and then there are the emotional aspects of the story. You
Yes.
can you
Yes.
can write a very great story. In fact, you could just take a play or a
Mhm.
theater piece, practice, embody it, dramatize it, go on stage. Voila, you are an
Mhm.
excellent speaker. You're an
Right.
excellent orator, but you may
Mhm.
have no deep connection to the work
Mm.
that you are presenting. The
Mhm.
difference with telling your own story is you have to have a personal connection to it. And if
Mhm.
you are not comfortable with it and you're telling yourself a story that I have to have had cancer or gone through
Right.
some debilitating, that in itself is a story that needs correction. So what I do is I help clients to understand the whole anatomy of public speaking using their stories, using their personal
Mm.
stories, tapping into their emotional intelligence, challenging those
Mhm.
myths, myth busters, and helping them
Mhm.
to understand and see the picture from a different perspective. Then, as far as you talk about brainstorming, there's so many things. Take an inventory of your life. Start from the
Mm.
things that you were in your childhood all the way up to now. You're going to uncover patterns. You're going to uncover milestones, moments, lessons. There's so much richness in you that
Mhm.
can be used and as example. And so you can start to ask yourself some of the things that you've learned, some of the things that you would love to teach others. And
Mhm.
from there, start to craft your messaging. What I do is, I told you I was supposed to be an investigative journalist.
Mhm.
So I work with my clients and I become that investigative journalist. And we dig
Yeah.
all up in your stories. And we have a wonderful time exploring, exposing. Some of the things come up and they don't want to use them, and that's cool.
Mm.
But the fact is,
Mhm.
they come up, and some of the stories that do come up, they're like, yeah, I can talk about that. I can feel good about that. And then you start to think about, okay, connecting with who you want to impact the most.
Mhm.
Where would be the most appropriate place to share this story? What would be the most appropriate way to deliver this story? What's the
Mhm.
outcome that you want this story to have? What's the feeling, the emotion? What is the action, the behavior that you want people to experience after they've heard your story? So you really have to get in touch with it. It becomes a living, breathing piece, an extension of who you are. And you'd find it difficult to do when we are moving so quickly, fast paced, just like, hey, Larry say, hey, I want to talk to multiple people, and boom, 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 boom,
Right.
boom. So, and,
Yeah.
and, and more people, they just want to go through storytelling checklist, checklist, checklist. Just give me the
Right.
framework. Give me the framework. Well, you're not actually connecting with your
Mhm.
story, right? So
Mhm.
slowing down and following a very intentional and strategic process will help you to do that.
Yeah. That is such great advice. I think that disconnect, it's really important in storytelling to really figure out, why am I telling this story? And what does this story mean to me? I mean, even if it's just something as simple as is, you know, getting getting a notebook, and like you said, taking inventory, taking stock of things that have happened throughout your life, memories that you have. Like, what is your very first memory ever? What do you remember? And I know for me, I have a very vague memory from my grandmother who came here from the Philippines, and she died when I was very, very young. But I
Mm,
have a very special memory of her, and it's just us swinging in a hammock, and I just remember feeling loved and
mm,
comforted, and, just a very special time for me. I really don't have any other memories, or I have one other memory of her taking me to a grocery store where they sold Asian food and groceries. And, she would get all of her items to come home and cook. And I remember she would make a special kind of candy. It's like some Filipino candy. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but because she died when I was very young, those are two memories that I hold on to, very closely, because the feeling that I get when I remember, that, and I want to hold on to that. So
mhm,
even just something as simple as writing down, in a notebook, and writing your prompt, right? What is my earliest memory, and why have I held on to that memory? Why is it important to me?
mhm,
And someone's going to connect with that. Someone's going to think about that, and go, man, I have something similar that, even with a grandparent or with a parent, that I just remember, feeling that. So that emotional, that connection that you want to have with your audience. Um how do you encourage people who maybe they're a bit timid with sharing those types of stories, because I think sometimes we feel like, as presenters or as communicators, right? As business people, we have to be
Mhm.
so stoic, right? We have to kind of put on this face that we have it all together. And as you and I know, we don't have it all together, right? We are human beings. So, how do you coach someone into thinking, no, you don't have to be stoic all the time. It's okay to show some vulnerability. That's not a sign of weakness. What are some things that you can tell your participants or your audience, whomever you're working with,
Mhm.
about that piece of the storytelling?
Yeah, so that is a great question because that's also another myth buster, right?
Mm, mhm,
So that's another myth. That's another myth that I bust all the time in my
mhm,
practice. And when
mhm.
people come out of working with me, you'll see that they're way more fully expressed with who
Mhm,
they are.
mhm.
I think a lot of times people get confused with this whole authenticity word, though, because
Yes,
you
yes.
you 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 can be authentic and you can show up and you can adapt to the environment where you are. It has nothing to do with you changing who you are or changing, you know, again, it's like a dress code, for example. You might go to an event and you feel like, well, this is my authentic self. And, the dress code might be a bit different. So, again, understanding that there's a difference between you being authentic and you understanding your audience. You wouldn't go to an audience where, let's say, scantily clad clothing would be offensive to your audience, because the
Mhm.
reality is psychology and perception influence a lot of how your message is received. And you don't want
Yes.
to create any noise before you get to the meat of your beautiful message and your beautiful
Mhm,
story. So, thinking again about your audience,
mhm.
busting the myth. You don't have to be stoic. You can bring your personality in there. But that part, again, is the self awareness piece, because some people have taken on a persona that is
Mm,
different from who they are for so long. They don't know how to feel comfortable stepping into who they truly are. And so
mm,
that whole process, you get to practice that in a safe space. You get to be reaffirmed. You get to be supported in a way that feels comfortable for you, not in a way where I've seen people, they come to me and they've gone elsewhere and they say, this is what I shared, what I'm struggling with. And I was told to just get on live and
mm,
just go on there
mm,
and get on live.
mm.
And I'm like, okay, yeah. I have clients who are not even on social media,
Right.
and they're doing excellent in their
Mhm,
respective spaces. So again, it's not a one size fits all. I bust a lot of myths. I'm out of the box thinker, and so that's
mhm,
what I bring into the practice. But definitely understanding the landscape and the environment of where we are. You may
mhm.
have a story that is fantastic, but if it's not relevant to any business audience, it's going to fall flat. And if you're
Yeah.
okay with that, that's okay too. So, the nuance between, okay, this is what I think is authentic versus let's talk about the trends, let's talk about the landscape, let's talk about adaptability, flexibility, and how we can marry the two so that you're
Mhm.
not feeling like, oh, just because I want to do what I want to do, that's authentic. No, it's not.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. I'm so happy to hear you say that, and I think one of the challenges also, let's say, someone wants to get into public speaking, for example. Um, you can ask them, well, what is your story? What is your message? What is it that you're trying to get across to the audience? And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just getting to understand, is it relevant, number one, to the audience? And like you said, you can have this fantastic story, but it's going to fall flat, if you're not connecting with your audience. So, another one of those things with taking inventory is just kind of taking stock of, what are your values? What do you believe in? What do you find important? And find those audiences that you can connect with in that way, as well. How do you translate? How do I talk about my values? What are some stories that I have that can express my values in a way that my audience will be able to get it, understand it and
mhm.
appreciate that. It's not a one size fits all, kind of thing. And I've met a lot of people who want to get into public speaking and they think that's what it is. I need to get this one canned presentation that I think is really good, and then I'm just going to kind of like pepper the universe with it, and just kind of see, and hope that that's what kind of sticks.
Mm.
um and I'm glad to hear you reinforce, that mindset of, yeah, uh be you, but also be mindful of your surroundings and the audience and the situation, and all of those things that are going to impact how they perceive you and your message. That's such an important piece, that I don't think we talk about, enough. When we focus on the stories, but we don't focus enough on that aspect of it as well.
Mhm. And
Situational awareness.
I want to add to like the when you talked about the canned speech. So that
Mhm.
worked. That was a
Mhm.
model that worked in the past. Like you go, you get your one big speech, your signature speech, and you deliver it. And that was the effective way.
Mhm.
But we are evolving. Our
Yes.
industries are evolving. And I taught public speaking before I became a public speaking subject matter expert at the university level for about 7 years.
Mhm.
And during that time, I had a lot of adults that would come in and they were so nervous. I mean, they would save this one public speaking class for the last semester before they had to
Yes.
graduate. They
Yes,
were
they would.
so nervous about this class. And a lot of times it was that preparation. A lot of times it
Mhm.
was, well, a lot of them were adults. So they were working, they had managerial roles. I had a lot of Army veteran
Mhm.
people in the class as well. So it was easier for us to integrate their world experience or their professional
Right.
experience into the actual storytelling conversation. So they feel
Mhm.
confident about that, right? They feel confident about
Right.
sharing their competence in the work that they do or who they serve. And for that, it was a business class. So for that, that worked. But now when we're talking about other business owners and we're talking about their personal story, that's a difference where it gets a little bit sticky if that person isn't comfortable sharing their personal story. For us
Mhm.
as business owners, you can be, I don't know, 10 finance and financial analysts or 15 lawyers. And if you're all talking about what it is that you do, you don't have a way to stand out. As a business owner,
Right.
people aren't really focused first on what you do, they're focused on who you are. And they want to be able to find some connection point. So there's a big difference there, on the business side from the academic side. And then with that
Mhm.
signature speech, nowadays, things have evolved. Before, you would get on stage and you hear about this inspirational content, this inspirational, motivational message, and that was sufficient. It's not sufficient anymore.
Right.
People want
Right.
more than that because we can go on YouTube and get that, right? So they want a little bit more. And I think it's
Mhm.
just important for those who are watching, who want to go into public speaking, to understand that trends change, industry changes, and to work with someone who can demonstrate to you that they're keeping aware of it so that as you're coming through the process, you'll still be relevant. That's the most
Yeah.
important thing. You're using
Yeah.
relevant mechanisms and strategies and tactics to position yourself.
Yeah. There is something that you said that I think it's a great way to kind of wrap back to the beginning where we started talking about, networking and meeting people and the challenges of that. You had mentioned, when someone, instead of telling someone what you do, right, explaining to them who you are. And I think for a lot of the listeners or anyone who's watching right now, that's probably the first time that they have been presented with that type of an alternative. Think about in a networking situation when we do have those tell me what you do, kind of questions. I think that's valuable advice, even in that type of an arena, to think about, instead of talking about what you do, start thinking in terms of who you are. What do
Mhm.
you represent? What are your values, and how you might be able to integrate that into your, that elevator pitch, if you will, or that, 1 to 2 minute speech, that self intro speech that you have prepared, for these types of events. Um, yeah, I think that's a great way to have permission to go about it in a slightly different way.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's no one size fits all. There's, keeping being open to testing and trying and seeing what works, but just
Yeah.
don't pigeonhole yourself into this one way. As a
Mhm.
communications person, you
Yes.
have to be adaptable. You have to be flexible. You have to see what the room is like and
Mhm.
what that person is like, and have multiple elevator pitches ready for yourself.
Right. Yeah. That's a critical piece, right there, is understanding that there is no one size fits all to communication.
Mhm.
At the very beginning, I said communication is a skill, just like any other skill. We got to work at it, and some of the tools that you learn to use will work great in one situation, and they will fall flat in a different situation. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think it's easy for people who are not in the world of communication to get frustrated because they want, okay, give me something that I can do that's just going to make everything work all the time. And that's one of those myths that I'm sure that you cover with your clients as well. Like, okay, this is what we can do with communication. This is what we cannot do, right? With communication. It's not going to solve all of your problems all the time, but be willing to try different things, be adaptable, be mindful, right? Be aware of your surroundings and pay attention to the person you're talking to. Prepare, right? Think about your audience and kind of take it from there, and give yourself permission to be human as well. I
Yeah.
think that's an important element. Just give yourself permission to be human. Um, this has been such a great talk, Monique. I've really enjoyed it. Is there anything that you think we have not had an opportunity to talk about, or are there any points that you want to make sure that the audience gets before we start wrapping things up? Um,
I just want to leave everybody with the encouragement that it doesn't matter where you are in the process.
mhm,
You can be a great speaker. You can be a great communicator.
mhm,
If you are willing to learn the tools of the
mhm.
trade and put in the preparation. I mean, a lot of times people reference Steve Jobs as one of the greatest
Yes,
communicators,
yes,
right? But
mhm,
he prepared so much to the point where
yes.
he would count the number of steps he would walk on the stage. So no, it's true.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what are you willing to do to prepare? You may feel like,
Mhm,
"Oh, I don't have to do that. I just want to be able to do it and flow." But anyone who is at that level of greatness in their presentation, they're putting in time, they're putting in effort, they want to bring
right,
the best of themselves for the audience, and you can do the same. It doesn't matter where you are. If you've never spoken in your life, you
mhm,
can become an excellent speaker. If you've done it already for a lot of years, like I say, things evolve. You can become an even better speaker. If you're already good, you'll become great. If you're already great, you'll become greater. And if you're already greater, you'll just
yeah.
become exceptional. So, you know, just go for it. Don't give up.
Yes, yes. Always room for improvement. Always. We're constantly learning. Now, one last thing. I had asked you if there was a book that you would recommend to the audience, and you wrote that The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. So can you just say a little bit about that, and why you recommended that book for our listeners, as something that they might want to pick up and read?
Yeah, and then there's two things that actually
Mhm,
coming up for me. So,
mhm,
The Success Principles is a book that I came across several years ago, and it changed my life because it
mm,
really helped me to. The principles are they're 23, they're short, they're focused, they're giving you permission to take responsibility, to be clear why you're
mm,
here. And it gives you examples throughout the book of when he and others have used them, applied them, and how you can apply them to your life to have new ways
mm,
of living. You'll get off that blame train. You will
mhm,
just, reclaim more of the outcomes that you experience in life, because there are some things that you can't control and there are some things that you can't. But changing the way that you approach it, the way that you connect
mhm,
with others, the way that you look at a negative events in your life, those are the things that really helped me when I read the book. And I shared it with my mom, I shared it with so many other people. Another resource I think that will be helpful is the Ultimate Speaker's Guide. And
Mhm.
I only suggest that because of what we talked about today, when
Yeah.
we talked about the storytelling and the
Mhm.
brainstorming and understanding the audience. So that has 70 pages. It's a digital guide, it's on my
Mhm.
website.
Mhm.
And people can go through those exercises, and you will walk out of there with a very powerful coaching experience going through all the exercises. If you can get to page 10, you're already a winner because a lot of people give up before they get there. So I will say go
So
ahead and
there
do
is your challenge,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's
Go
your
ahead and
challenge
do
to the
it.
listeners. Yeah. Go to that website, check that guide out and see if you can't make it. Make that your personal challenge. Go through that. I think sometimes it can be uh, it can be challenging for us personally, right? Some of the questions I think that were asked when we really need to take that deep dive into our own stories and in our own relationship with communication and others, and defining what it means to be a public speaker for us. I think you're right. It can be challenging. So I encourage everyone to go to your website. So go ahead and let everybody know, how can they contact you if they want to, just speak with you, or just get some coaching or whatever it
Yeah.
is that they might need.
Yep, you can go to www.moniquerussell.com. That's www.moniquerussell.com. You can also reach me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every week. So you can send me a message, reach out that way. But you can always connect with me on my website as well.
That's awesome. And you also have your own podcast.
I do.
So, yeah, that's another way to continue to get some great information from Monique. She is a wealth of information. So I encourage you, go to her website. I'll also include a link to her website, how to contact her, in the information along with this recording. I mean, we're broadcasting live on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube right now, but for later on, anybody who wants to watch this later on, I'll make sure that all of that information is accessible. Monique, thank you so much for being a guest. I think this was so incredibly fruitful for our listeners. We had a couple of really great questions. I think anybody who watches this, later on, they're going to feel like they missed out because they could have been involved and asked some great questions. But if those questions come up, we'll make sure that they're able to contact you. But thanks once again for being a guest on the Communication 24/7 podcast. I really appreciate your wisdom and your willingness to share, with others.
It is my absolute pleasure, Jen. Thank you so much for inviting me and just the connection that we have already had. Truly
Yes.
appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.